here, Michelle and I, to open the conference and really just to set the theme of cities, the place of cities in the world, and the future of cities. What about the people? People move around. They don't just move from the hinterland into their urban cores. They often move from area to area. And when they move, they bring with them their values, their expectations. So urbanization feels different in different parts of the world because the people who are moving there are different. They're coming from different places. They have different friends. They expect different things. So the qualitative change of these cities also happens. And if you think about the global middle class in Asia and China in particular, those Chinese values, as they move around the world, also change those cities. So you can see, for example, if you are designing an office building, you can't just design it for a generic person. You have to design it for the expectations of the people who move into those offices. And culturally, those people expect different things from their work environment than somebody else. So migration has a qualitative aspect. It's not just a big number. But in the end, how do we measure attraction? And are the things that we think are attractive actually attractive? And here is the secret of cities. People are not attracted to beautiful buildings. They're not attracted to nice landscape. People are attracted to people. We are human beings. We cannot help it. We complain about each other all the time. But actually, all we want to do is do what we're doing right now, which is to squeeze into one little room and be with each other and listen to each other. And then, of course, there are the effects of technology on cities and urban regions. So we've heard about the fourth industrial revolution. I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about it today. And the key thing is that it's already started, but it is a revolution. It is not a gentle evolution. There will be major disruptions because of this, lots of uncertainty because of the technology. And it's there because it makes possible an extreme version of what we call now the sharing economy. Again, remember the whole issue of migration and urbanization across cultures. Different cultures, different societies have different attitudes and different histories about sharing. So we might find rapid take-up of sharing in some places and less rapid in others. And that in turn affects how productive that area is, how quickly it can trade and exchange globally on these shared platforms. We can think about how technology is disrupting asset classes and investment patterns already. There are some types of investments which are still great prospects that have not yet even been touched very heavily by technology, others where it's already well advanced. But again, if you overlay changes in technology, cultural shifts, these factors also shape cities in the future. And of course, as an urban planner, some of the things I'm most interested in is the whole issue of driverless cars. Because when we have driverless cars, especially when they're well socialized and they're made available through artificial intelligence, the dependence on the private car and the spatial requirements for the car greatly diminishes. And that in turn makes available a completely different kind of city. So again, very, very rapid take-up. We already have Teslas coming out of Schiphol right now that could all be working in an autonomous mode very easily. We have driverless Ubers and driverless taxis already underway in places like Pittsburgh and Singapore and lots of other cities around the world that are trialing this thing. But why does any of that matter? It matters because a private car is not used most of the time. Every car requires 3 parking spaces, one at home, one at work, and one for all the activities in between. And some cities, in particular cities that rely very, very heavily on private car, have enormous parking requirements. In the case of American cities, you easily have 50% of the land area, and you can see here, okay, I'm cheating, I'm picking Buffalo, Houston, Denver, places like that. But 50% of the land area is devoted just to parking, not even to the streets, just to the parking. So when those parking requirements are no longer there because of autonomous movement enabled by machine learning, that in turn transforms cities. And we're going to see more and more of that moving forward. If you think about how much area of the city is typically locked up in parking spaces, you can start to imagine the impacts. What will this do to land prices when all of a sudden you have massive amounts of land available in core parts of the city? How quickly will this happen? It's unlikely that we'll have all of London, for example, become driverless, but you could easily have pockets of the city that would become driverless well before the city as a whole becomes driverless. So again, impacts of technology, the acceleration of sharing related to a single asset class. In this case, it's cars and their drivers. Now, you have a driverless car, means you don't have a driver in it. So taxi drivers are mostly out of work. So are a lot of bus drivers, so are a lot of delivery van drivers. But lots and lots of other people will also stand to lose their jobs, including many of us in this room. Our professions won't be around in 20 years or so. So what will happen then? These technology-fueled changes are not just social and demographic changes, they also change the quality of the city. And cities will be rapid adopters of this technology, so they will experience the changes probably before anyone else. And is there anything else that happens because of that? And we know about the Gini coefficient. This is a measurement of inequalities in cities or in regions or in any society. The way the Gini coefficient works is that if you have a coefficient of 0, theoretically everyone in the society is equal. If you have a coefficient of 1 or 100, all the wealth is concentrated in a single person. And so societies are always existing in a range over there. And you can see here that not the whole world is experiencing equality or inequality in the same way. We're very fortunate right now in the Holland metropole to be somewhere in the kind of very, very nice greenish zones. But there are parts of the world that are already pink going on to red. The French Revolution happened in France when the Gini coefficient was around 0.69, 0.7. So just think about the explosive changes, the revolutions that literally happened because of inequality. We are also going to see a lot of that now in this world of technology-induced change, urban-induced change, cultural-induced change. And that will also be part of the context of the city. However, I'm very optimistic in all of this. There's going to be a great deal of change. We will see this constant balance and rebalancing between solidarity of the place and diversity, the desire to connect and to come together as disparate groups. And that will also be the future of the city moving forward. So thank you very, very much for your attention.
Everybody together alone. So we have a new concept of tribes, tribals, relationships. We were talking just earlier that today in the public realm, you don't need to provide sitting benches like we did in the parks. Those kids are very happy alone, standing up with the headphones, their screen. They feel somewhere. This is a Googler. Do you know what a Googler is? Somebody in his bubble. Like the same, he's experimenting the next project that's going to captivate the young minds of our time. Now I go back to history. French Revolution was mentioned. This is the 18th century, the century of light, the Enlightenment. This architect was the king, the architect of the king, decided that cities were just about decorating the facades that the engineers were providing as infrastructure, circulation. He said, I'm going to bring the city into the space. So the engineers are working for me now. And created this incredible library. It's a library of knowledge. First time in a history of representation of a space that people are drawn. Before, it was just about objects, facades, power, representation. I would like to question this incredible Enlightenment time where universal values was exposed along with the human rights and the revolution that happened in France and kind of influenced pretty much the centuries after through America. What happened to our modern times? Same grand space to process a lot of people. Whether it's a train station, a shopping mall, an airport, everybody is in your way. Queuing at the line to buy, to put your credit card, in front of you to catch a train, and stressed by the airport threats of others, bring things that you don't want to experience with the terrorism and so on. So also, all of a sudden, this beautiful offer, proposal of the world together became a place of hell together, where we don't actually enjoy being together. So there's really issues that we have to address, solitude amongst others, and the representation of what is actually motivating us to create value, object of solitude, object with no ground. So the problem of the economy of consumption, whether it's space objects, is that we tend to forget that the value, the real value, is not just financial, it's also the one that can bring us all together. So I'm going back a little bit to the 19th century, 20th century, and questioning why our cities, our cultures, our mentors, our owners, our leaders forgot the nature of free space, of shared space, of places where everybody start to look beautiful together. The tent is an instrument that we invented to survive in hostile environment. And that became pretty much the two paradigms we still evolve today between the notion of the cave, the gathering and protection, and the tent, which is the exploration and the technology, which makes some of us, architects, glorified plumbers dealing with mechanical system. Same thing, cities are under the model of defining a very sustainable model of being together, protective, and they're not putting one against the other. But the tent became the challenges to gravity, the challenges to technology, the challenges to be able to cast concrete from minus 40 degrees to plus 50 degrees during the same 20 hours. All that is the two incredible capacities we have that we're going to need to basically reinvent. I'm going to mention now just an architect that had those two concepts in the mid-50s, mid-40s, Lloyd Wright, the first architect that I know that questioned territory, that questioned the culture, that had to be reinvented and secede from the European tradition to bring a model and impose it to other culture. He questioned the immensity of the Americas. The native Indians lived in a total different relationship to space. And in my opinion, he brought these two concepts of the tent and then of the grotto, the cave. And there's one specific building in the heart of Chicago. It's Unity Temple, and that has both. You see the ornamentation of a tent, and they have the feeling of a grotto. This is the two paradigms I think are going to be the incredible model for us to redevelop and rethink the sustainable century we need to address and imagine for ourselves and engaging with our own bodies, with the others, the one you love, the one you want to engage with, the one you want to relate to. So architecture for me is made of two things: spaces, and people. Now there's also another dimension that is also part of our consciousness today. And I believe that most of our representation of the world is through the mind. We live already, we're conditioned by a virtual relationship to space and people. And this one is the threat that we all started in France, now it's in the UK. But I'm not going to stay in a negative note. This is a beautiful park, you probably know it. It's not too far from here in Copenhagen, I think, by Bjarke. where things are not meant to be designed for, but they can be used by others. So this is like kindergarten, a garden for playground for kids where other people can enjoy it. So space, people, but that can change at different time of the day too. That I wanted to address this notion of time as well, where actually the same space can be used by different groups and different people. And there's nothing nicer than a playground. If you have kids, you experience that. I had a few kids, and the last one in London, seeing a playground with different age groups, different ethnic groups, all looking at their kids start to engage naturally without having to consume. And these are the core values of a society that will definitely work and live together. Thank you.
I realize that I have a pretty much a love-hate relationship with the idea of the agile city. Because if I go about it in a very kind of rigorous, almost blunt way, I would say a city is like a supertanker. A city, in fact, is a supertanker is tiny compared to a city. A city is a mammoth supertanker. There is no way that you can compare city to something that is as agile as a small car, a bird, a lean animal. A city is not lean and mean. A city is at best fat and mean, or grand and mean, if you would like a better word. The thing with a supertanker is it gets worse. The thing with a supertanker is that you all know that if you want to take a right turn in about half a day, you've got to start preparing half a day in advance. And you can prepare by, I don't know how it works, but something like turning the wheel or slowing down a bit or putting on some different engines. You have to be prepared. The idea of the agile city suggests that one, you're going to have to be prepared way in advance in order to make a certain turn. But the hard part is that we don't know exactly what the turn is. The supertanker captain knows, he's got lines on his screens. He knows when he needs to make this 50-degree angle turn left or right to sail to the next sea. We don't know exactly what's coming. So you got to be prepared a city years in advance, and you don't know exactly what you've got to be prepared for. So if you'd ask me direct, agile and city, forget about it. Don't connect the two things, because I know where it comes from. We all like to link the idea of city with some kind of hip and now concepts. But if you get down to the nitty-gritty of it, there is not such a thing as an agile city like there is an agile animal or an agile car or an agile athlete or an agile small firm. If you can imagine that car that can drive itself from your home to that concentrated parking lot, technology that's available right now, if we would demand this of Mercedes and Google to produce for us and people would start buying it, we would be able to start changing this step by step, one strip at a time, 25%, 50%, change it from this to this. Change it from this to this. This is a place where you can ask your kids to go outside and play in the grass. Change it from, this is 50% removed, and this is in the next step from this to this. When half of the people on one side of the street have all chosen to get this device that brings their car to a place nearby. This is the type of stuff that we need to start debating with Google and Mercedes and Volvo, so that we can, in the end, I hope, and maybe quicker than we think, even get to the possibility of a city like this, as we've shown in the case of Rotterdam. Thank you very much.
So Berlin is a particular interesting case because we had two very interesting phases. One, the first was after the war. I mean, the city got mostly destroyed, and then we had the wall running through right in the middle. And we had to recombine the two cities after '89 when the wall came down. And in a way, I mean, if you've been to Berlin before the wall and after the wall came down, you're fully aware that the city has changed beyond recognition. It's absolutely incredible. I didn't bring the picture for time reasons, but it's absolutely mind-blowing. And Berlin is probably the only old city of Europe that has completely reinvented itself, sort of talking of agility. and dynamic. With it comes that we had redundant infrastructures, airports amongst them. So the first one we closed down in 2008, Tempelhof. The second one, Tegel, which is my project, should have been closed down in 2012. Now we are looking at 19. So the new airport is supposed to open in 18. And that's what the whole thing is about. And the master plan is in a way very much a product of the 90s conceptually. It looks still segregated in a way, but that's the only thing you can do. We still have zoning and we have to respect planning law. But there's one stroke of genius, and that's the center, the campus. So the whole thing is created around a center of intelligence. We have a university there. It's all about urban technologies, and that's absolutely amazing that the city sort of took this foresight, because we looked at hundreds of innovation clusters and business parks and industry parks worldwide, and only those are successful that have a university in the center. That's what drives innovation and brings in the agility. The project itself sort of is just about 5% the size of Paris. The Cité de Paris is 5 square kilometers, very centrally located in Berlin, just in case you haven't been there, 15 minutes to Angie and 10 minutes to our shopping district. Surrounded by industry, so it's perfect for a project of our sort. But the great thing is that the city asked, in an open process, so what are the challenges of the 21st century? And we've already had the stats a bit earlier, mainly by Chris, about population growth and urbanization. And I think urbanization is the one challenge number one. But we see, on a positive note, cities as an opportunity. Because if you've got 70% of humanity living in cities, that means at the same time that 80% of wealth creation takes place there, and that's the point of change. That's where we've got the greatest impact.
The second part is soft urban renewal. This has changed in the last years because of the conditions of the private finance market, so that it is not that necessary anymore to support the owners of private houses with refurbishing. And the individual allowances is the third part of that. The question is how cities can assure this affordable housing, and I think there are 3 points we have to keep in mind if we want to have a successful and effective system.
So the point being is that cities are both opportunity, but they're also massive concentrations of problems. Okay, so let's just quickly look at the promise and challenge of technology. There's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of definitions out there about what's smart and what's not. And I'm not going to read all this stuff to you, but I think the interesting thing here is that the cities are complex ecosystems that rely on multiple stakeholders and core systems to provide a wide-ranging set of services. I don't often quote Rem Koolhaas, but in this case I will, where I actually agree with this statement that architecture used to be about the creation of community and making the best of it at symbolizing that community. And the fantastic risk we run at this moment is that basically we're marginalizing the sort of importance of the social component of community building and quality of life. We tend to think technology will solve everything. It cannot. These are 2 examples which I don't have time to get into detail about creating credible transparency. And this is, the first one is a project I did for the National Capital Parks and Planning Commission in Washington, D.C. Or Maryland, that took all the regulatory layers and combined them into that map that you see up there. And basically, the problem there is that the leadership's authority felt threatened. It's human nature that when you have decision-making authority, that you're reluctant to give it up. That's what is a fundamental problem in all public participation, because basically, as somebody who's basically a decision-making authority, I or she or somebody else might say, hey, you know what, I'm going to be nice to you and ask what your opinion is. And maybe I'll be even more nicer to you and take some of your ideas and implement them. But don't forget I make the decisions. That's not public participation. That's not an open platform. So the idea of both these examples that you see up here, one is for a national policy for Palau, an island country in the mid-Pacific, I'll give you the example here. So the red patch that you see in the bottom diagram was a composite of all the sort of environmentally and man-made sensitive areas, and that red patch was dominated by the fact that it was a wetland. It was not a wetland, it was a water conservation area that was designated. The governor who was managing the whole island says, I own that land and I'm just going to put a golf course on it. And we said, we didn't know it was your land. We didn't map all the property lines or anything else. Now, the question, the moral question in this sort of dilemma is, okay, how on earth do you create an environment where, what do you do with it? What do you do with a governor like that? And I was saying that this system is intended to create an environment where no one up and down the sort of knowledge chain or the involvement chain or the process, from the ordinary guy on the street to the executive, can say, I didn't know. After that, it's a social decision. Do you want to beat the guy up in an alley? Do you want to take him to court? Do you want to throw him out of the office? Or do you want to just accept what he's going to do anyway, for whatever reason? And I think those are fundamental sort of key issues about how entrenched governance and how basically this. Okay, last thing, yes. So I'm not going to get into data. You've heard me talk about data. You've heard me talk about governance. 3 points. One, to the developer, I would say, do not view the public engagement as an appeasement process. Work with or without cities to create better tools for inclusive comprehension of complex environments. The results will be more attractive and they'll market better. Trust me. To the technology provider, I would say the services and products you provide need to be bridges between what the city and its citizens need. Do not work to create a need when it's not in the best interest of the citizen. That's a tough thing to pull off. To the last thing, to the city, I would say transcend your fear of data and push to create open systems with information that's easy to understand. Create adaptive governance structures and methods that will help citizens be true partners. Take the long view. Put cities and communities first. Thank you very much.
Well, I had either the best job or the worst job because I actually had to pay attention to every single
like
talk.
Me.
You did too, actually.
I did too.
Well, very, very quickly, we had five sessions of the city space, mobility, social integration, circular economy, and citizen-centric development. I was struck by a number of things. First of all, in the first session, City Space, Rins and Philip talked about being prepared and repurposing the city in order to create value, as opposed to trying to make a city that could do anything and float on magnets like the Jetsons or something like that. They mentioned autonomous vehicle. The second group mentioned autonomous. Every group mentioned something about autonomous vehicles and autonomous systems, smart city systems. So I think that was kind of a striking trend. I actually kind of boiled it down to just a couple of things. So first of all, the autonomous movement, autonomous systems, smart city, that was kind of common theme to everything. And basically, the biggest thing that was going to affect the physical quality of the city was space release related to autonomous vehicles. That came through pretty clearly, even though this was not an autonomous vehicle panel or Congress. Every session, one way or another, spoke in their own language about inclusion, social inclusion. How do we get social inclusion? And it struck me that this is true whether they were talking about immigration or transport movements, the unworking class, as Aaron mentioned. And there's this paradox called induced demand. If you have a traffic jam on a highway, you can never build your way out of the traffic jam. You can't add more lanes because you just induce more traffic that makes an even bigger traffic jam. If you have an immigration issue, You can't really build your way out of immigration issues by creating more capacity for immigrants to come in. You just induce more demand for immigrants, and people are struggling with this. So whether you have a housing issue and you don't have enough affordability, or you have a service issue, you have congestion on the roads, how do you build your way out of those problems? Do you regulate? I'm going to have more percentage for affordable housing in my system. That's how I'm going to deal with affordable housing. Or do you increase supply? I'm just going to build more houses. That'll help me solve the affordability problem. So this issue, this struggle, somehow is coming through in a lot of the sessions. So then I'm thinking, what can I promise? If I'm a city mayor, if I'm a governor, if I'm a developer, if I'm a parent to my children, what can I promise people? What can I deliver on? And this is, I think, what we're all struggling with right now. And it came through very, very clearly in every single session. Somehow we know that our concepts about value are changing. We know what value felt like before, and we know that it had something to do with our own possessions, our territory, what we own, my corner office, my house, my car. And we sense that there's something about the system as opposed to the asset that is becoming more valuable. We don't quite know how, but if we're telling our kids, someday all of this will be yours, that sort of made sense 20 years ago, but nowadays we tell our kids, well, someday you will be able to talk to everyone you can think of. Maybe that's a new kind of value. So I sense, on one hand, we have this older idea about ownership, and we're moving towards something related to access. We used to talk about territory, what we owned, and now we're kind of talking about opportunity. So somehow this is a shift in value, and that came through one way or another in every panel. So is this sharing? Is this the sharing economy that we're talking about? Quite possibly. So I think it's something to do with this connectivity and whether the technology enables that connectivity, or governance, or shifts in our values enables that connectivity. Somehow that's where the value is. So I loved it, I love it when people bring up Jane Jacobs. Thank you for bringing up Jane Jacobs. Cities have the seeds of their own regeneration. What a great idea. Katrina and Bob in their opening talked about how cross-disciplinary ULI is and how this group is so cross-disciplinary. We have the seeds to our solutions in this room because we are cross-disciplinary, we have different viewpoints, and there are enough of us. We are big enough. We are the metaphor for a city. So I would just like to say in closing that ULI has the seeds for its own solutions. This is what we're here for. We have all the name cards around our necks. This is not to remind us of who we are, but who everyone else is. So let's talk to each other. Let ideas have sex, and let's see what we can come up with for solutions. That's what I observed.
Thank you very much.